Playing like a girl, running like a girl, kicking like a girl. For too long, these phrases have carried a negative connotation, undermining the strength, skill, and determination of women and girls in sports. But why does this bias persist? And where else does inequality hide when we look closer? How far have we come in terms of inclusivity and representation? What barriers remain? And how do we break them? Join us as we explore these questions with leading voices in sports and advocacy. We'll hear from Harvard University's Karen Korellis Reuther.
I was a designer by training and practice for many, many years, and today I would consider myself a practicing activist for ending gender bias in our built world.
The Vice President of Equity and Inclusion, Chief Health Equity Officer of Stony Brook University, and former Olympian, Judith Clarke.
I also am chair of the National Fitness Foundation, which oversees all the health and wellness of the nation, as well as chair of U.S. Anti-Doping Agency, which looks at clean and safe sport for all Olympic and Paralympic athletes.
Physiotherapist, researcher, and lecturer of sport, exercise, and rehabilitation, Dr Nigina Muntean.
At that time, as a student who was on an internship of some sorts, I was the first individual to provide medical care for the netball team, as far as she could remember. At that time, I think she must have been in her 50s, and she said she had been playing netball from the time she was in primary school. So you can imagine she has like a career in netball spanning more than 4 decades, and in that whole time, the first time anyone had ever delivered medical care to anyone in netball that she knew of was a physiotherapy student who was on an internship round at a National Youth Games tournament.
And former Chelsea and England footballer Claire Rafferty.
Played for Chelsea women for 10 years, also played for England Lionesses in 2 World Cups. Biggest achievement as a Lioness was a bronze medal at a 2015 World Cup, and also playing in Team GB at the 2012 Olympics.
And we'll hear from Dr Nigina Muntean, Head of Innovation and Transformation at the United Nations Sexual and Reproductive Agency, the UNFPA, and Lalita Taylor, Executive Producer of EDI programs at CoStar National R&D. Together, we'll uncover the challenges, celebrate the progress, and imagine a more equitable future for women in sports. Through their lived experiences and transformative work, today's guests show us that building an inclusive future isn't just aspirational, it's within reach. I'm Rachel Shelley, and this is Women's World, Equity by Design, brought to you by the UNFPA and City St George's, University of London. There's a term in marketing and design, pink it and shrink it, a lazy approach to products for women.
Christine Yu, she's an author on women's issues, and I think she coined the phrase shrink it and pink it, that the impact is that because we're not doing research on women, we're just going to take it as is in men, make it smaller, throw it in pink and a bit of glitter, and then we call it women specific.
But in sports, ill-fitting gear isn't just inconvenient, it's detrimental. What was your experience with equipment early in your career?
I wore men's shoes because I had a bigger foot, and most of the shoes were set up for sprints or distance, so they really didn't have a shoe for the 400-meter hurdles, and they didn't have a shoe really for women. And so I wore a men's shoe, which meant I have a very, very narrow foot with a very narrow heel, and so my foot never fit in the shoe. And so I had to wear, sometimes I would wear a shoe a size too small because that would actually fit my foot. But as you can imagine, it wreaked havoc on my feet. Or if I wore the correct size, I almost had to wear 2 socks, but my foot would lift out. So most of the time I was wearing shoes that were a size too small. Probably the thing that impacted our performance, mine and others, was our uniform. And so you have to think that you're going over 10 hurdles. and there's in every hurdle, you're in a compromising position. And many times the briefs that we would wear would be they're very thin, and they would be white or yellow or something that was extremely revealing. And most of the time they would do it for distance runners or sprinters. Well, sprinters we kind of had a more similar body, but of course we're taller than most sprinters. And so you can't just make a brief a little bit bigger. And so if you think about the mechanics of going over the hurdle, that many times they did not have the elastic to actually hold it in place. And so it would go to places that you didn't want it to. And you'd have yellow or white or some light colored, and you could see everything. And so the whole time you're running, you're trying to manipulate, well, you can't because your arms are running, and you just feel your briefs hurting. I mean, it literally hurt, as well as a singlet many times were men's singlets, which mean that, the scoop of the neck was longer, the scoop under the arms was longer. So you could just see inside. I mean, you could literally see. I mean, fortunately, we had jog bras, but you could see everything. So many times you would wear two singlets. But in major competitions, you can't alter your uniform, so you have to wear the correct uniform.
Poorly designed equipment doesn't just hinder performance, it can have lifelong consequences.
In the area of sport, it's like many areas in product design and the design of our spaces and places. I work on a continuum of insulting to deadly. So along the way, design can be insulting, it can be expensive, it can be uncomfortable, it can be dangerous, and it can be deadly.
I've done 3 ACL injuries, so I mean, I've accepted that happened to me, but it massively did put a spanner in where my career actually should have gone in terms of longevity, and down to things like footwear, the standard of the pitch. Like it was almost like we were always playing after the men had played, so it's never going to be in the best possible situation. And then also on pitches that were just not the right standards. I don't know the kind of the ins and outs. There's the kind of the injury likelihood on 3G pitches is a lot higher, and I actually did an ACL on a pitch like that. So knowing that could have been avoided and my career could have been an extra 2-3 years longer, is quite hard to kind of accept. And I know that there is obviously a lot more going into the research and development in terms of footwear, pitches, loading as well. I think on the women's side of things, because the game hasn't been professional for that long a time, the exposure that the young girls have to the training loads is just not at the right level in order to perform when they get older. And I think that is kind of one of the reasons. Well, I believe, I don't know factually, but I believe that those increased training loads when I got to those older ages were not at the same level as when I was younger. So my body just couldn't cope with it, as well as all other factors, that the menstrual cycle and how that can play a part. But yeah, there's so many different kind of elements, and I do still feel like there could be a lot more investment into specific programs around women's, physicalities and dynamics and hormones and everything.
All a good portion of high jumpers and long jumpers have had knee and hip replacements that from my era. And then one of the things that happened during the competition, particularly for long distance runners, is you get bone spurs. And so that's just like that constant impact, making contact because you don't have the correct support that absorbs some of that impact. And so bone spurs and stress fractures were really, really common when I ran, whereas they're not as common nowadays. Of course, tracks are different too. So the impact is different, but for distance runners, majority of their training is on the roads and it's out. So while they compete in ideal situations, majority of their training is happening on the road. So the fact that they're not having the stress fractures or not having the bone spurs the way it was during my years, that the equipment has made a difference.
For me, there's one specific occasion where we would play on some 3G pitches, and I would actually have to miss games because I was scared to play on them, because I was afraid that my footwear was going to get caught and I was going to increase my likelihood of injury. Obviously, off the back of already doing 2 ACLs, that was always in my mind. So actually missing games, and not being able to help out the team.
Aside from equipment and technologies, the spaces in which women play sport and the rules that govern them are also often designed without us in mind. What else needs to change to create an environment that allows women to thrive when playing sport?
Whilst I was at Chelsea, and this is just where Chelsea women's were at the moment, it's very different now, which is really good. But I remember, I'd have to go into, they had all the facilities there, but I wasn't really allowed access to them in normal hours. It would have to be, quickly, let's rush into the anti-gravity water thing. I don't know what it's called when you go on the running machine thing in the water. And it have to be at really kind of unsociable hours, because I wasn't meant to be in there because I was a women's player. So I wasn't meant to have access to it. It actually was the physio at the time who was doing me a favor, trying to get me into these spaces. So yeah, I think that's frustrating. It makes the recovery process longer, and it can hinder that recovery process, because you in order to get to that next step of your recovery, you need access and you need to follow the programs, and not being able to do that and being restricted because you're a woman is sad.
As individuals, we don't have the power to design stadiums. We don't have the power to put in toilet facilities at our training grounds. But if we have designed the football environment, if we have designed the sporting environment with women in mind, then we would have a bin in the changing room that women can throw in their used sanitary pads. Then it would be a matter of course that at every venue where women are going to participate, someone has thought of an area where if anyone is menstruating in that population, they can go and change their sanitary pad in dignity. They can do that privately, and so far we don't. So whilst this design in this instance isn't talking about the fancy stuff like football boots and fancy football uniforms, is the simplest of things that we have not been able to be menstrual cycle considerate, and therefore our design is flawed.
I think if I look at the fact that 2024 was the first year at Wimbledon where women were allowed to wear dark underwear under their white skirts, right? So Wimbledon, strict law, all white. That taking until 2024, I think Wimbledon, I should know this number, I think is over 140 years old, that women are just allowed to not have to wear white underwear in order, think about how uncomfortable that might be for that player and the mind space she needs to put on that. It's the same with football. I think the US team in 2023 was the first year that they weren't required to wear white shorts for their away uniforms, right? So these are things that have taken a very, very, very long time. It feels to me that there's been some progress, but not enough.
True equity in sports begins long before the game. It starts with research, infrastructure, and institutional will.
So in the US, there are 18% practicing industrial designers are women. Only 11% are in leadership. The UK numbers are even more dire, right? I think 5% of practicing industrial designers are women in the UK. In the US, at least, we're graduating equal numbers of industrial designers, men and women. So something is happening along that career trajectory that women are exiting the profession. I would say that it has to do with opportunities more than whether or not they are present in the beginning of their careers. So I think there is enough of a pipeline of industrial designers, for example, to be working in the sport industry, especially on footwear. I just don't know if the industry is taking advantage of it. And for certain, there aren't enough female leaders that can serve as role models and mentors to these young female designers. I know that talented women designers have been designing men's product for years and years. So I don't argue that you need a woman to design a woman's product. But if there aren't enough at the table, we'll be forgotten, right? We'll be an afterthought. And it's not by intent. It's just that's the nature, right? A practice we call the I theory, where you design for yourself first. Women are better at not leaning into the I theory, I believe, because we've been asked to design products for people who don't look like us for so long. But I do think that that practice sort of perpetuates in the sport industry, and the fact that it is a man-made world.
Our physiology, as we studied it, the default was a 70 kg male. And therefore, it would mean whatever follows from that knowledge, from that understanding, is based on a 70 kg male, and everyone else will just have to find their way to fit around it. Women, with their hormones and everything else that comes with being women and with being female, would then obscure the results or change them and introduce a lot of confounders. That also then meant those same hormones, those same things that make us women are then not factored in.
I think, first of all, we have to work on the culture. I think there's a perspective that girls participate in sports, boys compete in sports. Words matter. Tone matters, energy matters. I even see that in literature sometimes. It's like, girls participate in sport. I'm like, what was the word you used? No, girls compete in sports. They participate and compete in sports, just like boys participate and compete in sports. And to reframe competition in a way in which it is an asset of life. It is a part of elite leadership. It is the core skill that makes you the most resilient, innovative, creative individual that can address wicked problems. And we know, right, all the easy answers are gone. So you need people that have the skills to answer these wicked questions that are keeping people up at night. So the reverse engineer that all the way down to how do we create a pipeline of these incredible individuals is that we know that 50% and now almost more than 50% of the world is females. So that is your talent bank. So what do we need? How do we need to talk about participation in gym class, in sports? We have no problem having a club team for boys, but when it's girls, it's like everybody's a volunteer. What the what? Huh? So that's a problem. Right. If you're going to collect money so that you can pay some of those coaches, even for travel, or maybe it's about, creating, some kind of, because there's a tournament fee or something like that. The same model you use for boys, you need to use for girls, and create those opportunities and help them understand that participation is a growth model. We have to get off the ode, what it means to be, competitive is not feminine. Because let me tell you something, people like accomplished individuals. And leadership is strength. So to teach all those with 50% of the world's population, I don't know, it just makes sense.
We have 45% of young girls in the US are dropping out of sport by the age of 14 due to body confidence issues, when that's the time we want her to play. Let's spend more time understanding her and what it will take to keep her in the game, because we know it's healthy for her, right? We know the lessons of sport will stay with her for her entire life. I think there aren't a lot of female CEOs, but most of the ones that are spent some time playing sport, organized sport, whether it was in high school or college.
But progress is possible. How have things improved, and what still needs to change in the future?
You have lack of access to athlete support personnel, and when you have them, they tend to be volunteers or not quite as qualified. You have no access or poor access to conditioning programs, and all of those things then create the perfect storm that make it more likely for you to then get injured.
These stories remind us that change begins with mindset and culture. What advice would you give to young women dreaming of following in your footsteps?
My mother is a teacher and my father was an engineer, and I have both a right and left brain. And so from my father's DNA, it's called the signal and the noise. So I always have in my, I'm always fully grounded in there's a way to get there. It doesn't matter how dark it is, it doesn't matter whatever. And it's like, okay, there's a way of getting there. I'm fully confident there's a way of getting there. I just have to figure out what it is. And then my mother being the teacher who can take a leaf and make a whole curriculum off it, that creative piece of that, it's like, okay, I have to create the architects and the design to get there. And so I think the one thing I will leave is like, yeah, if you don't have hope, if you don't have a sense that there is a pathway, you just have to figure out what it is. If you don't stand in that, it feels weighty, it feels like it is insurmountable, and it feels like it is something that you could become apathetic and just feel like, what am I going to do? It just is what it is. Never in my life will I ever stand in that space. There is always a way forward. I will figure it out. There's a signal and that noise. I got to figure out how to get to that signal. And so if I can pass that on to others, is the only way you find the signal and the noise is you actually have to be looking for it. So you have to believe it's there, and then you look for it, and then that becomes your pathway forward. So I will, if I could leave anything, is to keep that level of hope. I don't care if it's like a law, a policy, a procedure, a cultural piece. Yeah, it may feel insurmountable, but if you have in yourself that I know there's a signal, you find the signal, you follow the signal, you make the systemic change. If I can leave that as a ripple effect, then I know that this evolution we call life will continue in the positive trajectory.
Starting my footballing career as a very young girl, I think the first step was that there was no potential for a career at that stage. There was no professional football teams. I had to play for a local boys team, and then when I got to a certain age, that then stopped just because of the FA rules, and I had to join a centre of excellence, which was just in its infancy. So I joined Millwall Lionesses at the age of 12. I think my biggest frustration at that age was kind of the lack of opportunity and visibility. So I think there was only ever one game that was on TV, and that was the FA Cup final. I used to always sit down, and I can just remember sitting in front of the TV watching that and thinking, oh, that would be amazing to be able to play within that final. But actually, at that stage, the game still wasn't professional. So it was very much, when I was playing and I was thinking about what could be, it was always the role models being around men's footballers. And my family are big Liverpool fans, so I'd always, be playing in the Guardian as one of the Liverpool men's players, rather than kind of the female equivalent. I guess after I joined Millwall Lionesses, that was what they would probably call an academy now, but it wasn't anywhere near that. It was twice a week training on a Tuesday and Thursday, semi-professional. It wasn't semi-professional. It was an amateur league. And I ended up getting my first senior call up in Millwall Lionesses at the age of 14. So I think maybe that tells you about the standards that was there at the moment. Like when I was younger, I used to get so frustrated that I wasn't able to, but I used to always ask myself, well, why not? And I think if we continue to ask ourselves, well, why not this? Why can't this be done? Why is this the case? Why can't I play football? Why can't? For me, it was, why do I have to wear a dress? Why can't I wear my football kit? The questions like that. I think if we're always asking the questions and always pushing the agenda forwards, it won't become an agenda and it'll just become normality.
Female designers are such a gift to any organization, right? Their ability to connect the dots, to be empathetic, to really listen, to understand that they don't know what they don't know is so powerful. When you get to the table, right? And hopefully there are a lot that are coming to the table, you will bring all that you bring. Your own experience, your lived experience, your ability to connect the dots, your empathetic approach. And having lived in a world that wasn't designed for you, you will be a better player and a better teammate at that table. So get to that table is what I say.
We have more power as individuals, as organizations, as families. In our small spheres of influence, we have power to change the narrative on women's sport. That power could be as simple as buying your niece a football the same day you buy your nephew a football. That changes the trajectory by exposing her to sport from the time she can walk.
To discuss this issue further and to look to the future, here are Dr. Nigina Muntean, Head of Innovation and Transformation for the United Nations Population Fund, and Lalita Taylor, Executive Producer of EDI programs at CoStar National R&D and former co-chair of BBC Women in STEM. Why should everyone care about equity in sports, and what can they do about it?
Thank you and hello. I'm Dr. Nigina Muntean, co-founder of the Equity 2030 Alliance. Sport is meant to empower women, yet often built without women in mind. From gear to uniforms to training schedules, they ignore their biology. Female athletes face risks and limitations their male counterparts don't. Our guests today explore how these gaps affect performance, safety, and confidence, and why inclusive design in sport isn't just fair, it's fundamental to equity and well-being.
I'm Lalita Taylor, and I'm also a leading expert of the Equity 2030 Alliance. As a cultural commentator and longtime advocate for equity in media and research, I've seen how design tells us who something is made for and who's been left out. In sport, that exclusion shows up everywhere, from the fit of a boot to the lack of medical staff on women's teams. But what we're hearing from our guests today is not just frustration, it's actually momentum. Women are not waiting to be invited into systems that weren't made for them. They're actually redesigning the field altogether.
And sport is more than play. It's where girls find their strength and voice. As we heard today from our guests, sport is a proving ground for equity. It's not just about who plays, but who is seen and supported. When girls wear gear not made for them or train in male-centered programs, we send the wrong message to them. Yet, they still show up and thrive. That's why equity must be built in from the start.
We heard stories of athletes like Judy pushing through pain without basic support or infrastructure, yet still excelling. So many women in sports do. Judy's words have stayed with me. Girls participate, boys compete. But girls don't just participate, they lead. Sport builds leadership, confidence, resilience. It prepares women for boardrooms, parliaments, and front lines.
Exactly. Supporting girls' access to sport and advocating for menstrual health isn't just about participation. It's about dignity and equity. It's recognizing their biology. Sport empowers, but only when it's safe and inclusive. Yet, many systems still rely on male data. Let's be clear. Gender neutral often means gender blind. Ignoring women's needs leads to harm. Inclusive design and investment in women's sport health must become the norm.
I agree. And there is a quote that is so simple, and that's from Claire, and it still echoes in my mind. She says, "Why not?" And that means, why not a sports world that recognizes women as full athletes, not just small men? If we want equity by design, we need to stop retrofitting women in male-centered systems. We need to build from their realities, physiological, emotional, cultural, and create something that's stronger for everyone.
Why not indeed? We know what to do. Investing in inclusive innovation, putting women and girls at the center of development planning. This is the way forward. And it's not just sport issue, it's a human rights issue. If women are not part of the data, they are not part of the solution.
Because designing for women in sport isn't a niche issue. It's a test of whether we take equity seriously on and off the field.
To the parents, coaches, policymakers, researchers, and teammates listening us, you are part of the blueprint for change. Throughout this series, we have seen that equity doesn't happen by accident. It must be designed. At UNFPA, we are committed to a future where every girl doesn't just get access, but get excellence.
The future of women in sports isn't just bright, it's unstoppable. But only if we don't choose to accept the status quo, centre unheard voices, and fight for systemic change. Thank you to our excellent guests, Karen Korellis Reuther, Judith Clarke, Nonhlanhla Mkumbuzi and Claire Rafferty, for their candour and vision. For more on our guests and their work, please visit the links in the show notes. I'm Rachel Shelley, and you've been listening to Women's World, Equity by Design. It was produced by Ellie Young, Maxed Adan, and Finlay McRae of City St George's, University of London. Thank you for being with us.